Welcome to the Fed Pilot Podcast, where we talk about everything federal retirement and more. And today's the and more piece, because we're going to talk not only about federal retirement and the benefits, but what affects those things. And today specifically, we are talking about the federal debt ceiling. Now, how can the federal debt ceiling affect your retirement? Well, let's go back a little bit. A few months ago, the federal debt ceiling was reached. That means we cannot borrow any more money to fund the government. Well, how are we funding the government then? How, if we can't borrow any more money, which we are living in a time where we spend more than we actually bring in through taxes, and we have to continually borrow. So how are we funding to, for example, pay your salary, to pay those who have retired, pay their pensions? How are we funding the government, the military, all the expenses of the federal government? How are we doing that? Well, there are four main ways to do that. Only the first two have happened. The first two are borrow. What are we borrowing from? Well, we are borrowing from two places. The first place we're borrowing from is your pension fund, the FERS and CERS pension fund. Yep, we're borrowing from that. Number two, we're borrowing from the TSP-G fund. You know how everyone says the G fund is safe, right? Well, the government is using that money to fund the government right now, to pay for the government. So how safe is it really? Well, to be honest, this has happened many times before. The debt ceiling has been reached. No agreement by Congress has decided, okay, we're going to raise the debt ceiling or whatever. They just kind of go on and they borrow from your pension fund. They also borrow from the G fund. But then when an agreement is reached, they pay it back with interest, and it's made whole again, right? One article I read says, the good news is that this is just an accounting gimmick. Well, that's one way to look at it, I guess. It's an accounting gimmick because they'll pay it back, right? But it's not a gimmick when they don't pay it back. Now, we assume that they will pay it back, right? That it'll just go on and it'll pay back. But here, another article that I was reading right here. National debt limit was raised $2.5 trillion in December of 2021. That is just over a year ago that the debt ceiling was raised. And now we need to raise it again. Let's just call it each year now we're having to raise the debt ceiling. And every time we don't raise the debt ceiling, we are borrowing from the G fund. We are borrowing from your pension fund. That honestly, I'm not even a federal employee, but that concerns me. And I'm not trying to be a conspiracy theorist, not trying to say, oh, doom and gloom. It's that it just concerns me that we're having to go into this debt ceiling almost every year now and try to figure out what's going on. Because that's a lot. I haven't looked back in the history, but I can almost guarantee that we're doing it much more often than we used to. And if that accelerates, where does that put us? Well, in an article, it says that, let me see if I can find it here, that they call it extraordinary measures, borrowing from your pension fund and borrowing from the G fund. If these aren't cleared up by June, what will happen? Well, we will get to the point where we can't borrow anymore from those. So instead of borrowing, they stop paying out. That's how they have the money. They'll stop paying out. What will they stop paying out? Your salaries, your pay, and also they will stop paying out to the pension to retirees. And I'm sure some other things, but in the article I read, that is what is happening, or what would happen if by sometime in June, they didn't exactly say when, but sometime in June, if Congress doesn't fix this, then that's what will happen. Wow, that's a little concerning. But then again, then they'll go and fix it after, let's say they do after June, then the federal employees and federal retirees will be given all their money back, right? They'll make up for it, but let's say it goes a month without being paid, either as an employee or as a retiree. That is not good if a lot of people don't get paid for a month. You know, how do you make the mortgage payments? How do you do all that? So again, I'm not trying to stir up craziness. I'm not trying to stir up conspiracies. I'm trying to look at the natural progress of things. What happens now? What is happening now? What would happen if? And these are very real things that will happen if it doesn't. Now, so far it always has, but again, the thing that concerns me the most is that this is happening more and more frequently. And at what point will we trip over ourselves, right? As we start running, we run faster and faster and faster until we can't keep up and we trip. And something's going to give. Something has to give for this to stop. Now, it could be that we just raise the debt ceiling an unlimited amount. It could be that we stop spending as much. It could be that we just say, sorry, federal employees, we're going to keep borrowing and you're not going to get your salary or paid or pension or whatever it is. I can't imagine that would happen, but something has to give here. So today's video, today's podcast is all about the debt ceiling. And isn't it interesting that the times that we live in and the extraordinary measures that have to be taken, I don't know that we can do much about it. That you and I, as average American citizens, we really can't do much about it, unfortunately. But it's good to know that you and I, we may all be affected, and we may not be able to do something about the situation itself, but we can, you and I, prepare just in case something were to happen. For example, it may be really smart of us to have a decent savings just in case something happens. To build up maybe a 3-month savings pool, 6 months even better, a year worth even better, so that if something does happen, we can continue to live and we can continue to be okay, and we don't need to be worried. And really, when we talk about federal retirement, right now we're talking about just life, right? When we talk about federal retirement in our workshops, we talk about looking down the road, saying what's coming or what could come, and then planning for that so we don't have the issue later on. We take care of it now just in case it happens later on. And that way we don't have to worry about retirement. Well, I'm using that same principle for just real life right now. Either way, it's important for us to look into the future, figure out what could happen, what likely could happen, what has a good chance of happening, and then figuring out how to deal with it just in case it does happen. And when we do that, we're going to be okay. And so I would highly encourage each of you to take a look at the situation, whether it be your retirement, whether it be this debt ceiling thing, or whether it be something else. Say, if that does happen, how do I make sure that I'm not freaking out? How do I make sure that I'm not in a worse off place, but that I have prepared now to take care of any issues that may come up, so that when it does happen, because there will be things that will happen, and when they do happen, you don't have to panic. You can be okay. So go prepare just in case. Not that the sky is falling, but it's good to be self-reliant, good to be prepared, and make sure that you are set when things do happen. Thanks for watching, everyone. Come join us for one of our workshops and learn how to prepare.